Okay? So wala siya mo gamit og double. So ang tendency, okay, niya iyaha pa yung ang si tawag anay, how do we call this? Gi-round off pa jud ang decimal place. So imagine kung magpalupad ka nag racket over long distance, dako kay na og difference didto sa target. Okay? So instead of hitting their target enemy, they were hitting their allied forces. Okay? So dako kay tong fiasco. So imagine tungod sa usa ka programmer, okay? So there were senseless loss of life because of that. So imagine guys kamo, okay? Bisag puhon when you graduate, you will have a chance to work with the unsa man na siya? Uh, Philippines Defense Forces puhon, di ba? So I think kita man mo atong sample nilang demonstration no sa Israel over Palestine. Okay, katong gitawag nila nga Iron Dome. Okay? Wherein unsa ganito siya, naslay mga defense rockets nga every time nga magpakawala og rockets dito sa Palestine padong diri sa Israel, sugato nila. Okay? So imagine the precision of that. Okay? So kung kamoy maghimog ng ato, probably for now, patay, papasta. Okay, walay ma-intercept ng mga rockets gikan sa kontra. Okay? So mo na mag-cut on jud ta og coding. Okay? Para mo palupad palag rocket ang kontra, awa nag-intercept na naapa di sa silang lugar. Okay? So anyway, again, that's one of the stories, guys, of how important floating points and doubles are, okay, in the field of computing. Okay, so of course, gamit po kayo na when you are trying to compute for interest, di ba, sa kwarta. Okay? So anyway, that's it for floating point number. So how do I identify a number that is a floating point? So of course, na siya fractional part or kanang gitawag nato nga decimal part. Okay? So again, you can add that header float.h, okay, to allow you to identify, okay, the range of numbers for that floating point type. Okay? So again, here is a sample code that you might want to try. Okay. Yeah. Again, we have the so-called void type. Okay. So when you say void type, that means you really are not expected to put anything there. Okay. So you will be encountering niya, okay, mga functions, okay, that makes use of the keyword void. Okay? So either kanang sa gitawag nato nga return type or sa kanang gitawag nato nga parameter. Okay? Parameter list. Okay? So when you see that keyword void under sa parameter list like this, okay, that means you don't need to put anything here sa iyahang parameter list. Okay? So when you call this function random, okay, pwede ra jud na siya nimo tawagon nga ing-ani lang. Rand semicolon. Okay? Now, what is meant by int dere? That is the return type. That means when you call this function, you might need a variable to store the value that will be generated by this function. Okay? Kani, if you have a void, okay, on the function that you are calling, pasabot ana niya when you call this function, okay, you won't need to put anything here on this side. Wala ra ni siya, not needed. Okay? Pero as you can see guys, naamay data type required para sa iyahang argument list or parameter list. So that means you need to put something there. And unsa may ibutang nato diri guys, as indicated. Okay? You are to put an integer. value. So unsa man ang integer value? An integer value is any whole number. So you can put 4 baron. And you terminate that with a semicolon. Unsa ng status? Status is a variable. Okay? A variable that will be used inside this function. So later we will be talking more about functions para masabtan niya na nato siya. But for now, okay, let's focus first more on the data types. Unsa na si int, unsa na sila void, unsa na sila float, character, so on and so forth. Okay? So sa variables, nabot na ba taan ni variables? Last time, wala pa.
Wala pa
Guys,
sir.
wala
Wala.
pa. Okay. So what are variables? Okay. So initially, variables are basically user-defined identifiers. Okay. Now we will use variables, okay, to represent those so-called memory location, okay, on our computer. And how does the computer allocate this memory location on your computer? Okay? Magdepende guys sa type that is associated with your variable name. Okay? So your variable could be an integer type, a character, it could be a float, it could be a double. Okay? And how big the size these memory locations are occupied by this variable will depend on the type. Okay? So typical syntax when declaring your variable. Okay? So it is as simple as i-identify nimo ang data type and then your user defined identifier. Okay? So we are already aware of how to choose our identifier. Unsa ganito yung mga rules guys when choosing an identifier? It always starts with
Letter.
okay. So it starts with letters, big or small. And can I start with numbers?
No, sir.
No.
Bawal sa
How?
symbols.
Okay, bawal po ang symbol. How else could I start my identifier aside from the letters? Underscore. Okay. So you could start your identifier using a letter or an underscore. Okay? Then of course, ibutang nimo ang data type. Okay? That your variable would be representing. Okay? Would this variable be for a floating point number, for an integer, for a character, or a double? Okay? So nganong gamit man kay na ang variable? Okay? So of course, just like when you are trying to solve problems, okay, there are those gitawag nato nga mga unknown values. Values that later might change. Okay? So thus, gipanganlan siya variable. Okay? So variable, it varies. Okay? So wala tay fixed value for that. Okay? So here are just examples of how you can define a variable. So here we have the variable identifier code, okay, and your variable data type. C, what's to? Char, car. Okay. How do we pronounce it again? Char or
Car.
car? Okay,
Car.
so
Car, sir.
let's pronounce it as car. Okay? Kay naiuban mo tawag yung char jud lagi ko no siya dili siya car. Okay? So again, those are examples of how you define your variables. Now, take note, what if na ko'y multiple character variables nga i-declare? Would that mean kailangan na ko ibutang siya one line at a time? Okay? So you could actually declare multiple variables of the same data type in a single line. Okay? You just have to separate your variables with a comma. Okay? So that is one. Just like for instance here. Okay? So pwede ka kabutang og comma. Okay? So here, okay, what's wrong with this one, guys? Float complex voltage. Okay, so naay space according to Mr. Canonigo. So dili na siya pwede. It will generate an error. Okay? So what will we do to correct that problem? Okay? So you can make use of an underscore. Okay? Okay? Okay. So later on, guys, in one of the lessons, okay, you will be introduced to different ways of creating your variables or kaning gitawag nato nga mga naming convention. Okay? So this, for instance, is an example of what we call as the camel notation. Okay? This one, okay, gitawag natong snake. Okay? And there's also another one wherein, for example, kanang si max term, okay? If you write it like this, okay? Nga puros nakakapital ang first letter, mao sad niya ato ang gitawag nga Pascal notation. Okay? So again, this is the Pascal notation. This is your camel notation. This is the snake. Okay? So that's also found later. Makita na ninyo dito sa inyong kwan, guys, sa CodeChamp. Okay? But is it really that important or mag-error ba ako ang compiler if I don't observe this following convention? So actually it will not. Okay? Wala ra jud na siya effect, guys. Okay, sa imuhang compiler. So it's just kwan lang, some of those conventions being utilized by our programmers. Okay? So what I suggest is that if you try to create your variables or identifiers, ang i-adapt nato is kani. Ang gitawag nato nga camel notation. Wherein, if let's say for example, your variable is composed of two words, okay? Ang first letter sa first word is small letter. Unya, ang sa mga succeeding word nga first letter would be capital letters. Okay? So, mo na siya ang camel notation niya. Na yung mga tanang, anong camel man, sir? Kay kung magtanaw kas camel manggod, mura siya camel. Kay tungod sa capital letter, okay, in between the words, na ay hump nga makita. Okay? So, mo na siya. Though dili applicable sa tanan, kay moingon kag letter K nga dako o letter K nga gamay, na mo jud hapoy hump. Okay? But essentially, kon lang na siya. Again, it's just a notation. Okay? It really won't affect how you compile your program. Okay? So, unsa man sad ning variable initialization? Okay? So what is variable initialization? Variable initialization is basically assigning a value to your variable. Okay? So, as what we can see here, okay, for characters, ang timan-an ninyo, it is always enclosed in single quotes. Okay? For integer, you write it as whole numbers, as is lang. Okay? For long, again, long is just an integer with a wider range. Okay? Here is your float. Again, how did we know that it is a float? It supports decimal point. Okay? And here is again your double. Again, it supports decimal point. Okay? Nya, nganong nakaingon man tag double ni siya, why not makaingon ta nga float ni siya? Kani nga value. Why can this value only be placed in a double data type? Why not put it in floats? Idea? Or pwede ra ba? Pwede ra ni sa float ibutang kaning si pi? Yes or no? What do you think? Anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. No? Is that a no with a question mark or is that a no with a decimal point or a period?
More than 6 ang decimal sa pi.
Okay. So take note, for floating point types, it will only support up to 6 decimal places. Kani nilapas na og 6 decimal places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's now 10 decimal places. So if that's the value that you want to store, you better put that in a double. Otherwise, you will lose some of those information. Okay? So, let's say for example, if I have here a character code, okay, and I will put there 0, okay, and I also have here an integer I, which is also equivalent to 0. Would that be the same? Can we say that the value of code is equal to the value of I?
No, sir.
Okay, no. And why is that no? Okay. And why is that no? So that is because when you store a value of 0 in an integer variable, ang makita ra jud nimo sa memory ana is values of zeros. But for character, take note, the character 0 is represented in another value, okay, based on the so-called ASCII code. Okay? So kanang zero nga value sa ASCII code is represented by another integer. Okay? So dita kaingon nga code is equal to I because the value representing 0, character 0, is not equal to the value of 0. Okay? So I guess we have already demonstrated this before. Okay? How will you know? Gani, ang value represented by character 0, okay, you simply make use of the format specifier %d instead of using %c to display the character. Okay? So anyway, ato ara nang mabalikan niya later. Okay? Now, some things that you should also take note when you are working with expressions in C. Okay? So natay gitawag nga L value ug R value. Okay? So unsa maning L value? Okay? So L value are expressions that refer to a memory locations are called L value. So unsa may example sa L value? Ang variables. Those are memory locations. Okay? An L value may appear as either on the left hand side or the right hand side of the assignment. Unsa man ang assignment? Assignment operator, the equal side, the equal sign. So when you say L value, like for example G, it could appear on the left side or the right side of your expression. So naputay R value. Okay, unsa man sining R value? An R value is the data value that is stored at some address in the memory. Okay? So kanang R value essentially are those so-called constants that you might want to store on your variable. And therefore, dili siya pwede mausab, di ba? So therefore, when you say R value, they can only be placed on the right-hand side of your assignment operator. Okay? So di ka kaingon nga 10 is equal to 20. Di man nimo masud si 20 sa 10. But you can say G is equal to 20 because 20, an R value, pwede man nimo ma-store sa L value. Okay? So take note, an L value is referring to a memory location. Okay? Now let's talk about constants. Okay, so in a way na natay idea gamay about constants, character constants, integers, floating points, and doubles. Okay, so take note lang when you will be working with constant, these are referring to fixed values and these values can never be modified. Okay, now some examples of integer literals that we have here, guys. Okay? So, how to write your integer? So far, ang ato ang gibuhat is puro whole number lang. Okay? So, we can also write it in this manner. Okay? Unsa man ning u pasabot. Okay? So, u there represent unsigned value. Okay? Mo na pasabot ni u. And unsa man sad ni siya? 0x. Okay? Nya na I feel. What does that mean? 0x represents that your number is in hexadecimal. Okay? Niyang hexadecimal, sir, is A to F raman ang letter na may L. L here represents it's a long. Okay? Nga literal. Okay? So here is an example of supposed to be written in octal notation, but this is illegal because when you talk about octal nga number system, you only put there a value between 0 to 7. Ang 8 walay labot. Okay? So here is another example wherein again could generate a syntax error because you are only to use the unsigned how do you call that? Suffix kasara. Okay? Di ka mag-unsigned. Okay? So again, you use U to define. If it is unsigned, you define L. If that is a long nga modifier. Okay? So take note lang, you can use 0x for hexadecimal and you can use 0 for octal. Okay? So those are some of the ways how you can assign a literal value to your integer. Okay? So most of the time, mga tuwa for now, stick lang sa ta diri sa decimal. Okay? Di kay tatig work with hexadecimal and octal for now. Okay? So again, more examples of how to assign or to make use of the so-called integer literals or how to define your integer literals. Okay? So as you can see here, a combination of unsigned and long nga literal. Okay? So let's look at floating point literals. Okay? Now, one of the most common way to identify a floating point literal is by simply adding a decimal point on the value to be stored. Okay? Now, another one would be by adding, okay, your exponent to your input. That is also actually legal. Nga you write your floating point value in this format. Okay? So in this format, it is illegal kay nga naman wala may value sa exponent. Okay? Dire, even though gibutangan natog F, it would still be illegal because walay decimal point. So when you identify this as a floating point value with a suffix of F, you should at least put a decimal point for the number. Okay? And this one, again, this is illegal because nga naman, wala tay fractional part. So kinsa may iyahang raise to the power of 55 kung walay value nga gibutang. Okay? So again, exponential forms are okay, but take note, you need to have the so-called mantisa there. Okay? So kani unsay pasabot ani? E-5. Okay, so that is times 10 raised to the power of negative 5. Okay? So again, here we have the character constant. Again, to assign a character constant or character literal, all you need to do, guys, is simply enclose it in double quotes. Okay? Now, I have told you earlier that for characters, you can only store one character at a time. So, nganong naaman ni gitawag nato nga duha lagi ni kabuk character slash t. Okay? I thought only one character ang ma-store sa character type nga variable. Okay? This, guys, is a so-called exception. Okay? Kanang mugamit kag slash, okay, before a designated letter are usually called escape sequences. Okay? So it will be actually equivalent to when you say slash n. Okay? So slash n is actually not two characters, slash and the n, but actually they represent a single character, which is basically, it represents a new line. Okay? It will generate a new line on your expression. Slash t, unsa man ning slash t? If slash n creates a new line, slash t is equivalent to a tab. Okay? Familiar mo how tab works in Microsoft Word? Okay? So muhatag siya additional spaces, di ba no?
Intention, sir.
Indention, sir.
Okay? Indention. So, let's say for example, ang indention nato kanang tab, let's say equivalent to 5 spaces. Okay? So example, ingana, if you have actually made use of a tab as your indention before you print some characters here, okay? With tabs, pwede ka kabutang og character preceding to that even up to here, di ba? And this will not move. Okay? Unlike kung moingon kag space nga 5 spaces. Kay kung moingon kag naa kay character diri nya muhatag lang ka og 5 spaces. Okay? So it will create that 5 spaces. So kanimuhang word nga i-display sunod will be moved on that location. Whereas ang tab dili, di ba? Kay mura bag kung wala pa kay previous character nga mabutang nga mula pas diri nga space, I could still put that letters there or that string there. But kung ang characters previous niya mula pas na, then it then moves to the next tab position. Okay, so that's how your tab works. Okay? So later, so ayan na niya ninyo guys. Okay? So for example, kani hello world, okay? So that tab there usually gives you an exact um, placement for the word hello world. Okay? Despite of let's say string na imuha niyang ibutang somewhere in between before niya. Okay? So here are just some of those examples, guys, okay, of our escape sequence. Okay? So probably usa sa mga gamit jud kayo nato is kani slash new line. Kay we can actually see it directly sa screen nato. Okay? So, of course, you also have here slash t. Okay? And probably you might be able to use this also later. Okay? Backspace. Okay? Unsa man ng backspace? Okay? So sa tuwang keyboard naatay button or naatay key dira nga backspace. And what does backspace do?
Delete sa characters.
Krisha, you eat. Okay? So what does a backspace do? Okay, it deletes the previous character. Okay? So essentially, mao pud ni gibuhat ni backspace, guys. If let's say for example, natay word diri, word. Okay? And you put there slash b. Okay? So if you try to print this, okay? Oops. Kadyot lang, asa naman to. Hindi man mo gawas ang output. Sige na lang, later na lang. Try it out na lang dira sa inyo ang code chum. Okay? So again, those are just some of the escape sequences that you might commonly use. Now, if you try to use double quotes, okay, as you print your text inside printf, di ba? Double quote is supposed to be an opening and closing for the string literal that you want to display using printf, di ba? So, kung mag-printf ka, like something like this, nya moingon ka og hello crush. Okay? Kana hello crush. Nya ganahan kasi crush imuhang i-double quote. Okay? You cannot just do this. Kay nga naman, igbasa sa compiler, gigamit niya ang double quote to identify the string nga imuhang i-print. So essentially, this will be the string that it will be identifying as the thing that you want to print on your screen. Unya, supposed to be after that closing double quote na kay closing nga parenthesis to terminate the printf function. But since instead of a closing parenthesis, nakakita man siya og another opening nga double quote, this will generate an error. Okay? So what do? You make use of these so-called escape characters para ma-display nimo ang double quote diri sa imuhang string literal. Okay? So that is one of the application aning gitawag nato nga escape sequences. There are characters nga dili nimo ma-print with printf without the so-called escape sequence. So the same as when you want to display a slash character. Okay? There are some compilers nga dili mo dawat og display og slash character without this so-called backslash. Also with single quotes. Okay? So I have tried this before na ay mga compilers, guys, that actually accepts single quote lang. There are also compilers that won't accept single quote lang. So for that to be valid, panigurado na lang og butang og backslash before the single quote. Okay? So take note, walay space in between sa backslash ug sa character nga ganahan nimong i-print. Okay? So mao na siya guys. So again, this is your string literal. Okay? So sa string literal na to, again, is just a combination of multiple characters. Okay? And to define that so-called string literal, you need to enclose it in double quotes. Okay? So later, atuan yan ng subton guys. Nganong ang string literal is just an equivalent to multiple characters. Okay? And how do we create a string literal in C? Okay? So again, those are examples of how you identify string literals in C. Okay? So here is another way of defining constants. And again, as what I say, ang constants are values nga you cannot modify in C. Okay, now there are two ways of how you can create your own constants in C. Okay, one is by using sharp define. Okay, so this is a processor directive. Now, let's say for example, when you say sharp define, which is again, you place this before, asa ganito guys, before the main method. And you want to create a variable nga dili na jud mausab ang iyang value. Okay? Like for example, when you create a constant variable, usually you make use of all caps. Okay? So that it will be easy to identify that this variable is a constant. Okay? What is max? So probably a value that would identify the upper limit, okay, of let's say an expression that you might be using in the future. Okay? So that is how you write it. Okay, that constant. So kaning max, kadjut lang guys. Okay, sorry. Okay, so again, when you use the sharp define in C programming, okay, there really isn't, or this preprocessor doesn't consume additional memory on your application when it is run. What this preprocessor do is that during compile time, any word nga gigamitan og max on your code will be replaced with the value of 10. Okay? So mo na gibuhat ni sharp define guys, okay? So again, during compilation, tan-awon man na niya imuhang program, di ba? When you say compiled language, it first checks the entire code. Okay, mo na gibuhat ni compiler, then i-check niya for the word max. O tanang max ilisan niya 10. Okay? Now, probably you might be thinking, nganong magbutang pamanday ta og constant? Mag-define paman ta ning max. Butangan na lang day nato og 10 largo ang sa code, di ba no? Hasol-hasol lang taan ng gamit-gamit og define. When in fact, you can just put there 10 directly to the code. Okay? Now, the reason for that, guys, is that there are cases that when you create your program, okay, nga mugamit ka og certain value, kanang murag giingon nilag magic number, constant number, okay, to manipulate some values in your expression. And let's say if you are not unsure of that value nga 10, imagine, let's say for example, code nimo, you have used that value 100 times si 10 sa imuhang code. Now, what if nakaingon ka, uy, murag bati gamiton ang value nga 10. I would like to use 20 instead. Nya, kapila na nimo gigamit si 10 sa imong code 100 times. So pangitaon to nimo tanan. 'Di ba? So mag-ana na sa ka control F. Look for 10 then replace. Replace all. 'Di ba? Hassle kay no. But if you use this guys kaning gitawag nato nga preprocessor sharp define and in your code you simply use this variable max, okay? If ever you need to modify the value of max on all its 100 kabuok occurrences sa imong code, anhira ka diri sa ibabaw mag-usab sa value niya, di ba? Let's say change it to 20. Kanaray usbon nimo and it will affect all the code in your program. Okay? So that is one application of how to make use of the define, sharp define nga preprocessor in creating your constant. Okay? So again, when using sharp define with your variable, it is recommended that you use all caps when creating your variable name. Okay? Another word is cons. Okay? Unsa man sining cons. Okay? The keyword cons is utilized together with the data type constant that you will be creating. So for example, int uh, any value baron. Okay? And you also have here a float, which is, let's say for example, most common pi. Okay? So ito lang sa ning erase. Okay? So sa pen, of course, it's just like declaring a variable with an initial value. So you make use of equal sign. Okay? So sa value, it could be any value. Let's say 100 baron. Okay? Ang pi, so that would be 3.14, so on and so forth. Okay? Now, if this variable is di kaganahan mausab na siya along your code, you want this variable to be treated as read-only lang by your code, kay there might be cases wherein if you modify this, it would change how you do your computation. Is there a way for you to make this variable read-only? Okay? To make this variable read-only, all you need to do is simply add const before the data type name. Okay? Now, kung mangutan na ta, okay, murag mas nindot lagi gamiton si define. Kay di na ko mo gamit og equal sign. Okay? Now, there is a reason guys why we also might want to use the const nga keyword when creating your constant value. And the reason is with the keyword const, we are able to identify what the type of constant value is, di ba? Like val, it is an integer nga constant. Si pi, it is a float constant. Kung mogamit kag define manggod, wala ni siya'y data type associated with it. Okay? So in your code, you might want to know if the value ba is an integer or a character or a float. So that's why we also might need this constant keyword. Okay? So, mga na siya guys. Okay? So again, some examples of using the sharp define preprocessor. Okay? So since, as you can see, kanang si length with those are constant value, they are treated as L value or value. Okay, ano to? So si length ug width, are they treated as L value or R value?
R, sir.
Okay, they are R value since you cannot modify its value in the memory. So naara jud na siya sa R value. So that means when you use those constants, they should only appear on the right side of the equation. Okay? So here is another example of the const keyword. Okay? So again, when creating constant, it is a good practice that those constant variables that you will be creating are written in capital. Okay? In that way, it will be easier for you to identify which are those so-called variables that you might be changing its value, or those variable name that are considered as constant and are treated as read only. Okay? O kinsa pa maning wala pa ma-add. Sumalinog, wala pa ka sumalinog. O wala may kwan, nagpa-add ka? I don't see your request. Okay, i-try ko nog request kay wala ko kakita sa imong request diri sa classroom. Make sure to use the class code. Unsa to? Sanken 2209. Nasod na? Okay. So padayon ta. Okay. Now let's proceed to the input and output. That means, okay, previously ang ato ang gibuhat was how to generate an output padong sa imuhang monitor. Okay? And right now we'll also be talking about input. Okay? Para magamit na nato ang ato ang flowchart nga parallelogram nga read. Okay? So how can you as a user enter a value that your program might be using? Okay? For your application nga buhaton. Okay? So we need to know about kana the input side of programming aside from the output side. Okay? So again, there's a short guide there sa CodeCham about input and output. However, we will be discussing it here in detail para masabtan jud nato what goes in the background. Okay? So typically, okay, when you talk about input and output, okay, C utilizes this so-called input text stream and output text stream. Okay, so anything that is coming from your keyboard, okay, will go into the so-called input text stream, wherein that is where we will be getting our data. Okay, so likewise, any data that you may want to present on the monitor, muagi pod anang output text stream before it is actually displayed on your computer's monitor. Okay, but again, the good thing about C programming, you won't be dealing the nitty-gritty part of how the computer implements this so-called text stream. Okay, naa na tay mga functions nga magamit that will easily be usable. Okay, for them to modify your data. Okay, so here are some ways of how you can inject an input to your C program. Okay, so naatay function nga gitawag nga getCar. Okay, so sa getCar, if you try to open your Embarcadero, okay, so get car. Okay. So as you can see, get car, guys, when you use your control spacebar, this so-called IntelliSense would appear. Okay. Now, how do we use this IntelliSense to in a way that it will guide us or give us an idea of how to actually use this particular function? So this is how you use it, guys. When you talk about function, expected, di ba, na open close parenthesis. Unsa may ibutang nato sa open close parenthesis? So again, if I put my mouse over here, ipakita ni niya, guys. This is the function declaration. And as you can see, para sa open close parenthesis, okay, it doesn't require any values, naka-void. So you just leave this as vacant. Now, just like any function, just like the int main, di ba? Naa siya gitawag nato nga return type. Unsay return type sa getCar? Okay? So i-disregard lang ng C underscore underscore CDECL. This is what is more important. Okay? So as you can see, getCar. Okay? Character ang ato ang kwaon. Pero ang iyahang i-return nga value is integer. Okay? So take note, even though integer ang pangayoon or ang iyang i-return nga value to the user, take note, those integer, pwede ra gihapon na nimo ma-represent as a character, guys. Okay? So as long as, of course, you don't enclose it in a double quote. Take note, a character and integer are stored similarly in the computer's memory. Okay? Ang kalahian lang is how you interpret it when you are presenting it to the monitor. Okay? So just like atong gi-demonstrate nato last time, nga gagamit tag %d ug %c. They are the same variable but they were displayed differently on the computer. Similarly, okay, when you store, okay, a value padong sa computer, let's say mubutang kag 5. Kung 5 ang imong i-store sa computer, then it will be stored just like that of a numerical binary number 5. But if you enclose 5 in a single quote, okay, ang store sa computer's memory, dili ang value nga 5, kung dili ang ASCII code for the character 5. Okay? So essentially, when you use getCar, okay, i-return niya is the ASCII code. Okay? For the letter nga imuhang ipa-display. Okay? So, again, that is what getCar are used for. Okay? Tigbasa og usa ka character. Okay? We also have kaning gitawag nga getch. Okay? So unsa man sining getch? Again, just like the getCar, it reads a single character from the keyboard. Pero it does not use any buffer. So the entered character is immediately returned without waiting for any key. Okay? So unlike sa katong gi-demonstrate nako ninyo before, kanang scanf, nga pwede ka kabutang og multiple characters, multiple numbers, and kanus aman mo terminate og pangayo sa input the moment you press the enter key. GetCar will only read one character at a time. Okay, so that means, or that's why it doesn't use any buffer. Kay kung unsay gi-type nimo sa imuhang keyboard, basahon ra na niya largo. Okay? And that is for getch. Napud tay gitawag nga getche. Okay? Unsa may kalahian sa getch o getche aside from the letter E. Okay? So ang kalahian lang sa getche, guys, compared sa getch is that when you type a character or when you type on your keyboard, when you use getch, it is stored directly in the computer's memory or the variable. Whereas when you say getche, it also prints it, okay, on your screen. Okay? And store it on the computer's memory. Okay? So, mo na kalahian sa duha. So, if you don't want nga ang gi-type nimo makita nimo sa screen, you use getch. Pero kung ganahan ka nga i-type nimo makita nimo sa screen, then you use getche. Okay? So, mo na kalahian sa duha. Okay? You also have this so-called gets. Okay? Unsa man sa ning gets. So if getche, getch, and getCar is used for reading a single character, gets is used to read an order sequence of characters. Kanang gitawag nato nga string. Okay? So that means kaning nga function gets allows you to read multiple characters. Okay? So how do you store multiple characters? Okay? Now, if you want to store multiple characters, guys, all you need to do is make use of this syntax. Okay? So A serves as your variable. Okay? O kaning gisulod nato sa open close square bracket will serve as the size. Okay? That number there would determine how many characters are to be stored on your variable A. Okay? So, when you talk about character, di ba, kung sa computer's memory pa na siya, it is represented by 8 bits or kanang gitawag nato nga 1 byte, di ba? Let's say for example, kung 1 lang. However, if you declare your character in this manner, okay, this is what we call as later an array. Okay, it's basically a group of character variables that can be called using a single name, si A. Okay, so let's say for example, I'll just put here A is equal to 4. So ang buhaton sa computer ana guys, it actually allocates 4 character space in the computer's memory. Okay? So mo na ang gibuhat ani niya. And when you enter your string, okay? So take note, string which is a sequence of characters, they will be entered in this manner. So let's say moingon ka sat. Okay? Mao na ang imong string nga i-enter. Okay? So it will be stored in this manner. Okay? Wherein, base sa size, it will be stored on location 0 sa A. This will be stored on location 1. This will be stored on location 2. Okay? So this is what we call as kanang index. So again, we will be discussing more about that. Igabot na to sa topic on array. For the meantime, think of this open close square bracket. Okay? Kaning value nga gibutang nimo dira, it will determine pila ka book characters ang dapat nimong store. Okay? Mao lang sa nay huna-huna for now. Okay? So if you want to display that string as stated, you use %s. Okay? So actually, after you guys storing this string value to this variable A, aside from the word SAT nga gi-store niya sa imuhang variable A, nagbutang pa na siya another character. Okay? /0, which is a so-called string terminator. Maunay gi pantayan, okay, aning imuhang gitawag nga format specifier up to pila ka characters ang ihang i-display. So this is actually automatically added as you press your enter key to store the string that you type for variable A. Okay? So sagli lang, we will be discussing more about that later. Okay? So again, that guys is how you can store, okay, a series of characters. Okay, now why would we need to store a series of characters for our application? Okay, this can be very helpful, especially if you want to implement this problem. Asa naman to? Algorithm and pseudocode. Kahinumdum mo atong example nato before sa flowcharting wherein you are also to display the name of the student. Okay? Wala na? Wala na hinumdum? Wala na. Okay? Past is past man. Mao na mo. Okay? Luuya sa mga ex ani gipang kalimtan na. Okay? So anyway, we have that before sa ato ang discussion wherein you are to store the name of the student or a person. So how do you intend to store the name of a person if you can only store one character at a time? Di ba? So there must be a way for us to store a name, which is basically a series or a sequence of characters. And you store those sequence of characters using this format. Okay? So, mo na siya guys. Now, here is the, ikapila naman siya. We have get car, getch, getche, gets, niya ang ikalima. Okay? And probably the most common way of entering a data sa imong application. Okay? Using scanf. Okay? Nganong siya may pinaka-common? Simply because when you talk about gets, it's only for storing a series of character. When you talk about getch, it's only used for entering a character. The same is for getch. The same is for car. Pero when you use scanf, you can use it to store not just string, you can also use it to store characters, floats, integers, and doubles. Okay? So, the thing about when you are using scanf is that it is very important for you to make use of the ampersand symbol. Okay? Unsa man nang pasabot anang ampersand symbol? Okay? Why do we always need to put that ampersand symbol before your variable name? Okay? Ang pasabot mong gud-an ng ampersand symbol dira guys is that it can also be read as address of. Okay? So it can also be read as address of. So when you use scanf, okay, when you use the scanf, we use this format, okay, to identify the data type that you will be reading. Okay? So we have used %d. Unsa gay gamit aning %d when we were using this with printf? What did we use %d for when we were using it with printf? We use it to display float, character,
Float.
double,
Decimal, sir. Decimal, sir.
decimal. Nalimot na juday sila. Okay? So we use %d to represent integer values. Okay? So if you want katong gitawag nato nga naay decimal number, unsa ganito nga data type? Kanang mga real numbers na fractional part. What data type is that?
Float, sir.
Float. Okay? So you use %f if you want to display it as a floating point number. Okay? In this example, as what you can see guys, the variable a, okay, that you have created will serve as the storage of the data nga ato ang i-input sa computer. And what is that data? Integer. Since a is an integer, we use %d. Okay? As the type specifier. Okay? So mo ni nakanindot ni scanf. Kay nga naman, you could actually specify here what type of data is being read and where to store that data. Okay? So dapat kaning data type nimo diri guys, okay? Kaning data type sa imong variable should coincide with the the format specifier nga gigamit nimo with scanf. Okay? So we use %d for integer, we use %c for floating point, we use %c for characters, and we will use %s for string. Okay? So just like here, okay? Diba? A here is an array of characters. Okay? So when you say array of characters, it's just like saying you are storing a string. Okay? So take note, those terms are similar. Okay? So when you talk about string, you're actually referring to an array of characters. Okay? So you use %s for that. Okay? So let's look at how you can use scanf. Okay? Now, with scanf, the good thing about this is that you don't need to create or to use scanf to store a single entry lang from the user. You can actually have multiple entries from the user using a single command scanf. Okay? So, if you look at this example, guys, okay? Gigamit nato si scanf. Kapila ta nag %d. Kaduha ta nag %d. Okay? And what does this mean? This means that the first entry that I have entered is for the variable a. Adto na niya i-store. Okay? So mo na siya. Ang unang gibasa niya an integer, ibutang niya at address a. Okay? So again, at address or address of a, adto niya ibutang. Unya, as you can see, separated by a space. Okay? So you only need to put a space sa imong entry para ma-recognize ni C that the second value nga ibutang nimo is to be stored on the variable B. Okay? So again, just to kwan lang. Asa naman to si CodeCham? Where is my CodeCham? Dara. Okay? So nani gitawag na playground diri guys wherein you can create or play with mga sample codes o manong giparenthesis man na niya. Okay? So kanang dinaliay lang ba nga checking. So you have int main. So typically if you want to have variables a and b populated, okay, you might be saying scanf, okay, so %d, then so make sure you always put the ampersand, okay, symbol. Okay, without the ampersand symbol, okay, that would generate an error, guys. Okay, so let's say %b, okay. So you can also do it like this. Okay, so ito alay butang a is equal to, para ma-display ang value, %d. And b is equal to, again, %b. %b, sorry. So, first %b, so, dili mo gana ang, lagi mo gana ang plus. Okay? Kana, maklaro ra guys. Okay, so you have a and a, comma b. Okay? So, you can do it like this, nga binagsa siya. Okay, ang scanf nimo. So again, executing the code. Okay? So make sure lang po guys you are into interactive mode. So that means I am now in the interactive mode. I can type in my number. So let's say 12. Okay? So every time I'm done with one entry, I press enter. So I'll press enter now. Bang. So that means I'm ready to enter the second number. So let's say 3, 4. The moment I press the enter key, bam. So ana pa niya i-print. Okay? So I have here a value for A. Okay? O dili ko makakita sa ako ang code. Nyara na sobra ag padako. Okay? So that is what happened there, guys. Okay? So ang A was displayed here as equivalent for %D. Yeah, %D for B. Okay? So again, this is what it will look like if, let's say, for example, okay, you use to scan if. Okay? Dawato niya ang entry the moment you press the enter key. Okay? Now, in the example sa inyong notes, kato atong gipakita, wherein, okay, the %D was separated with a space. Okay? Ging ani na to. Okay? Written in a single line, to scan if. So when you execute the code, okay, if you want to enter those two values, 12, okay, and 13, you can use space. Then let's say 14 baron. Okay? So space separated. Okay? Para mabasa niya ang entry. Okay? So if you use the enter key, okay, mabasa gyapon niya. Okay? But unlike atong ganina, okay, you can actually enter your value in a, or you can write the code for entering multiple values separated by a space using this format here. Okay? So mo na siya guys si scanif. So again, base sa ato ang example, okay? So you can actually present your data here as a number. Okay? You can also present them as a character. Okay? If you use the %C value. So all you need to do again is just type in the variable that you want to the variable you want to display. So again, ang kalahian sa scanif o printf is that when you use the variable here, you always need to put the ampersand, indicating that the value nga imuhang gi-enter is stored at the location of A or the address of A. Okay? While here sa print, all you need to put there is the variable name. Okay? So kung say value niya, mo na yung ma-display dere. So again, let's look at the second example. Let's say 30 and 60. Okay? So as what we can see, when displayed as a character, ang 30 is a non-printable character and 60 is the less than, okay, character in ASCII code. Okay? So again, as you can see guys, the same data are stored, 30 and 60 for A and B, but we were able to display them differently base sa gitawag nato nga format specifier. Okay? So those guys are how you can add entries to your C program. Okay? Now, another one, okay, to generate an output aside from printf, you can make use of putchar. Okay? So as stated, putchar, you put a character on the screen. Okay? So again, dili kay ni siya usually gamit. Usually mas gamit kayo si printf para nato. Okay? So kung gets na po siya corresponding puts. Okay? So put string. Okay? So ang function lang niya, it display the output as a string. So in that case, we have here gets A, display report as S. So obviously, for us, medyo hassle na kayo magbutang pag another line of code when in fact, you can just put it here under sa printf using the format specifier %s. Okay? So ang kaapa na ning puts, kabaw manggod siya daan, nga string ang ipa-output. So you won't be needing any format specifier. But for printf, if you have a variable here that you want to print, you need to specify the format for displaying that data. Okay? Okay, again, di ba? Pwede na to ma-display ang integer as a character. Okay? Now, let's try to understand a bit more about the use of scanf since you will be using a lot of this, okay, sa inyong mga activity. Okay? So, typically, as what I've told you earlier, okay, ang entry nimo gikan sa keyboard will pass through a so-called input stream. Okay? And the values entered in the inputs text stream is the one read by scanf. So, nakabantay mo ato ganina guys when we simply made use of a single scanf to read multiple data. Okay? So, we use the space as a separator to read multiple integer entries. Okay? So, with scanf, take note lang, you need to specify explicitly the type that you will be reading. Okay? Be it for an integer, float, or character. Okay? So in this example, as what you can see, you can read your data, okay, as an integer, as a float using %f, and as you can see, even though that is a character type, but since we are using an array of character, ang ato ang ibutang rapod diri guys is what? %s, dili %c. Kay when you say %c, usar ka character ang iyahang basahon from the input string. Since we want nga ang basahon nato diri is the string itself or the array of characters, especially if you are writing there referring to a name, di ba? That's multiple characters nga dapat basahon, terminated by a null or a line terminator. So you make use of %s. Now, unsay nabantayan ninyo diri guys? Okay? Sa kaning nga scanf nga syntax. What have you noticed? Unsa to? Walay and operator si text, no? Okay? Bitaw, nganong palahi si text? Okay? Nganong wala siya butangi og ampersand? Okay? It is because, guys, when you define a name for an array of characters, that name actually contains the address of where this variable is located. Okay? So, let me show you this. Okay? So, okay? So, let's say, kani, ampersand A, ampersand B. Okay? So, I will be printing, okay, what A contains and what ampersand A contains. Okay? So si A ato ang i-display, si ampersand A ato apong i-display. Okay? So para makita nato ang difference between the two. And let's also put this percent S for, let's say, name baron. So mag-create po ta og character name. Let's say for example, good for 10 characters lang. Okay? So as you can see here, I didn't put na the ampersand before the identifier or before the variable name. Okay? So I will display here the name value, which is using the format specifier %s. Okay? And I'll also put here the name itself. Okay? But this time I will display it using %b. Okay? So for A, again, I'll just put here %b. Okay. So again, as you can see for the name, guys, okay, I have placed here the name value to be displayed, okay, and this display na ko as decimal, okay, and also I'll put here penny 0. Okay, so diba I told you when you are storing an array of characters, the value 0 will actually contain the first character of your array. So I will be displaying that as a character, which is %c. So I'll also call it like this. Okay. And ato apong ipa-display ang iyahang gitawag nato nga location. Okay. And this one, saan siya? Ampersand name 0 is equal to, so since that is an address is basically a whole number. So I'll display it as a decimal. Okay? So butang lang taog return 0 para di ta kasab-an ni compiler. Okay? So execute ang code. Okay? So sometimes ingani ba magpaabot ka, mubutang na ba ko sa akong input, di pa. Okay? So sometimes it is a good practice po, guys, that naa kay tandanan as when to put your input. Okay? So again, this is just for example lang. Okay? Para naalang tay idea asa dapit tay butang ato ang entry or kung mubutang na bata. Okay? Bisag magtuta ni hang ang program. Okay? So at least dire kabawta nga oy naa na siya dire. Whenever maka-encounter mo scanf, it will really wait for you to input a value. So let's say unsa man na siya A ug B again 5. Nya pila mo diri sa klase 33 supposed to be. Then ang name. Kinsa mang name diri ang wa mo lapas og 10 characters. Kinsay ato ang example. Si ko na lang. Si Mayor. Okay? Oh, there you go. Okay? So here, as you can see, ang A Okay, nga value ato ang ipa-display which is 5 and it is located on the memory address kani nga location. Okay? So layo kay no. Pila naman ni 1 thousands million. So naa siya diri dapita gibutang address. Okay? So this is the address guys of where this value is located in your memory. Okay? So si B, as you can see, gi-display na to ang B nga variable lang. Ang naa sa sudan ng B nga variable is 33. But if you display B with ampersand, ang imuhang gi-display dira guys is the location in the memory where 33 is stored. Okay? So mo na pasabot-an ng nay ampersand. Okay? Mao nang delikado kayo guys nga if you don't put an ampersand here, ang ibutang ra nimo A, asa man na si A? Wala ta kabaw asa or unsay value ni A diri. Okay? So that could cause your program to crash. Kay it will be putting the value that you have scanned to a random area in your computer's memory. And doing so may cause some important information in the memory to get overwritten. Okay? So that could crash your application. Okay? So again, ikatulo diri gi-print nato ang name Igot. Okay? And we have also we we have also di man ma-minimize darade. And we were also able to display the address of the variable name as to where it is located, and based on it is located on this address. Okay? Now tanawa guys. Ako ang gi-display ang first character by putting the location. This is how you add the location. So, location of the first character. Open, close, square bracket. Okay? So, unsay gibutang niya dira, open, close, square bracket at position 0. Its letter I. Niya, kung tanaw na to guys, asa located ang kana nga information si I. It is located on the same location or the same value held by the variable name. Okay? So kana ding moingon kag name, mura pud kag gabutang direct ampersand kay it actually holds, okay, the location of the first character for your string. Okay? So tanawa guys ha. So let's say ato ang ikwan. I-try na to display nyara. Butang tag /n derivative para di magsumpay. Okay? So let's try to put also the value of the second letter. So for the second letter sa name ni Igot, how do I identify that? Magbutang ko og 1. Okay? Kay again, this works on the idea that the first letter is to be displayed naa siya sa index 0 or kanang value nga 0. Okay? Oops. Wait sa guys. Okay. So again, executing the code. Okay. So again, let's have that same value gihapon. 10, then ikot. Okay. So instead of a space, ako ang gi-press ang enter key. Still, that is recognized as continuation para sa next entry sa scanf. Okay. So again, makita nato diri guys. Okay. So as you have noticed, nausab na sad no? Okay? Nausab na pod ang address. Okay? So ganina it was around 8 million. Karon 5 million yan na negative. Okay? it was because ang ato ang gigamit decimal, which is used to represent both positive and negative number. But we know that when you talk about address, guys, that's actually all positive. So mas maayo dayon tag atong gigamit diri is kwan ang P nga format specifier. But anyway, again, as what you can see here, guys, okay, look at the address where the variable are stored. Okay, so ang name was stored on this address 46, ug ang letter G ni ikot was stored on this address 45. Okay, so they differ only by 1 byte, which is equivalent to 1 character. Kay kabaw man ta, on this address is where the letter I is stored. Okay, so mo na siya, guys. Okay, ang reason why you don't need to put an ampersand there is a scanf if you are scanning for an array of characters. Okay, so you can just put there directly the name of the variable representing your array of characters. Okay, so proceeding. Okay, here is like the so-called guys, generic syntax of how you can extend, okay, the functionality of scanf. Okay, if ever ganahan nimo i-modify. Okay, okay, so far when you're talking about format specifier, it is just as simple as putting there percent value. Okay, so you can actually put there other fields aside from the typical percent %d, percent %f, percent %c, percent %x, percent %s. Pwede ka magbutang dira og conversion characters. Okay? So, as stated here, as you can see, if we are to make use of this format, okay, if you put there asterisk, it will skip the input field. Okay? Unsa man sa ng max field. Again, this kanang makita ninyong open close square brackets, guys, okay, sa syntax, kuha na siya kanang optional. Okay? So I'm just showing you here some of the ways of how to use scanf. Okay? Now, kung magsunod ka dira sa CodeChamp, dali ra kay na siya kay basic ra may gipakita. Okay? So kanini in-depth lang tani on how we can use scanf further. Kay you might encounter problems later on when working with scanf. Okay? So at least masabtan to ninyo unsa to nga problema all about. Okay? So again, optional with kanang max field, okay, will give you the maximum number of characters to assign to an input field. Okay? So pwede nimo ma-limit ang number of entries, okay, para sa imuhang scanf nga command. So again, in this example, as what you can see, okay, I have here entries for, let's say, an integer x and y, and I also have here input for an array of characters. So for x and y, as what you can see there, guys, kang x, gilimit nako ang number of entries para sa integer x with just two characters, two values. Okay? Dire, as is lang kung pilay madawat. Okay? And then, what do we have here? Percent %f. But before the f, you can see there asterisk. Okay? Unsa to'y pasabot sa asterisk? Ang pasabot sa asterisk, skip the input field. Okay? So, di na niya apilon. Okay? And lastly, you have your elephant. Okay? Wherein sa elephant, how many characters ang basahon? 5 characters lang. Okay? Now, let's try to understand what happened. We have entered this as an input. Okay? For the first scanf, gabutang tag 1, 2, 3, 4. Para sa sunod, Okay, nagbutang tag space, gabutang tag 5.7, then space elephant. Okay. Now, when we generate the output for this variable x, y, and text, okay, ang gi-display sa iyaha is kani guys. Okay? For x, ang na-display is 12 lang. Why 12 lang? Because of this limit nga to ang gibutang. 3.4, nganong 3.4 man, nganong dili man si 5.7 nga naaman dire ang space. Okay? Now, since we have added a limit to the number of entries for your variable x, automatic ang remaining entries ato nga gibutang nimo is fed sa variable y. Okay? Mao nang ang 34 which is supposed to be sa x ibutang is nabutang na hinuon sa y. Okay? Now, how about 5.7? Why am I not seeing this anymore? It is supposed to be put here, kang %f. Take note, gagamit ta og asterisk. So that means kani nga entry that using %f is skipped. Okay? Next, we have here %s, but nagbutang ta again og limit which is 5. So that's why we only have 5 characters there that is being read. Okay? So that guys is just one of the ways of how you can extend the functionality of scanf. Okay? So you can add the asterisk and you can also add the max width. Okay? So okay ra, nasabtan ra ang gamit sa max width o asterisk for scanf. Again, this is seldomly used sa to ang mga activities, but again, it is something that is nice to know sad. Okay? Now, going through formatting the output. Okay? So I think na natay idea ning formatting the output no using printf. Okay? So just like scanf that you can control what type of data are stored or how they are stored in your computer's memory, you could also control how your data is to be displayed on the screen. Okay? So using the format specifiers nga to ang na-mentioned earlier such as %d, %s, %c, %f. Okay? Now actually those are not just the format specifiers nga pwede natong magamit. Okay? So there are a lot more. So again, just like the input formatting concept, okay, the output formatting concepts works similarly as that of scanf. Okay? So naakay data that you want to display on the screen ipag-agi nimo printf. So of course, base sa format specifier gigamit nimo ni printf on how to display those values. Ig-agi niya ni print screen then towards your computer monitor. So again, si printf na bahala mo format how those data are to be streamed padung sa monitor. So this part here, you don't need to worry. Anhin na daogon sa printf ninyo nga command. Kay kung unsa gibutang ninyo dira nga formatting, that is how it will be displayed on the monitor. Okay, now so far we are already familiar with the common format specifiers such as %d, %f, %c, and %s. Okay, are there other ways of how we might be able to modify how data is to be displayed? Okay, especially let's say for example when you're talking about %f. Okay, so sa %f, take note, pwede niya ma-display up to 6 decimal place if you're into float, 15 decimal place if you're into double. But what if you are talking about money? Kung mag-display kag kwarta nga denomination, do you really need to have all those 6 decimal place and 15 decimal places displayed on the monitor? Di ba? Dili ra no? pila raman ka decimal place ang relevant?
Duhara, sir.
Duhara. Okay? So is there a way to control that? Okay? Obviously no. Gidiscuss good ni sir. Okay? So just like scanf wherein you can control how many characters are read, okay, during the input stream, you can also control actually how many characters would be displayed for the output stream. Okay? So that's why naatay ka na gitawag again, your syntax. Okay? On how you are to display your data on the screen, okay, of course, together with those typical format specifiers nga to ang nagamit na. Okay? So as what we can see here guys, again, gisulod na siya og open, close, square brackets because these are optional. Okay? You may or you may not use it. Okay? But if you put a value in between that percent symbol and that format or that so-called conversion character, this is how it will be treated. Okay? So as what you can see, minus. Unsa man ang minus? Kung magbutang kag minus dira nga value guys, okay? This is what it will do. It will perform left alignment. Okay? For the values nga imuhang gi-entered. Okay? So that negative value there is very useful if you would specify kung pilay gitawag nato nga number of characters nga i-reserve nimo para ma-display ang imuhang data. Like let's say for example, mag-specify kag width. Okay? So, let's say ang width nimo gibutangan nimo 10. Nya ang imuhang character nga i-display is nara sa 3 characters. So by default, it will be displayed on the right side. Okay? Pero since napamang kay 7 kabuk characters bakante, is there a way to present it nga nasa center? Unfortunately, wala. It's either left alignment or right alignment ra jud. Wherein right alignment is the default. So kung ganahan ka left aligned, so mupidpid siya dito sa left side, okay, sa imuhang gi-assign nga minimum width, okay, then you use a negative sign. Okay? Unya, dot. Okay? So the dot represents the precision value nga ganahan nimong i-display. This typically works well with floating point numbers, floats and doubles. Para makontrol nimo up to pila ka decimal place lang ang iyahang i-display. Okay? So take note, if S is used as a conversion character, then precision determines the number of characters to print. Okay? So just like katong sa scanf nga nagbutang ka og number. Okay? So let us look at some examples. Okay? So as what we can see here, again, giprint nato ang color, S, number, integer, float, okay? Floating point number. Okay, so dire again, you don't need to always put there, let's say a variable. You can actually put there a constant value, which is pareha ramang gihapon. Okay, so if you print this, ang mo display dira color red. Okay, kay string man, gagamit man tawag string literal, and ang number 42 integer man. Then for the float 5.2. So instead nga i-display niya ang tibok nga 3.14159 up to 0.14 lang kay ga-specify man taog precision value. Okay? Which is good for 2 decimal place. Okay? So mauna siya ang nahitabo. But niya ra kadto lang. Wala matarong ang spacing. Okay? So, let's, kadyo lang. Let me run that in our compiler kay murag naguba ang format sa presentation. Okay, let's run it here in again. As an example, there is a code chum. Okay. O tarungon lang nato ang tabbings. So again, the tabs really won't affect how your code is to be compiled. But again, for best practice, okay, make your code readable. Every time that you encounter this so-called statement block, inside the block, you add an indentation. Okay, so it is for your reference and it will be easier to read your code and it will be easier for you to identify which code are part of which statement block. Okay, so again, running the example, hopefully walay change in the characters being added. Okay, so oops, kajut lang. Let's put sa /n para dili mo sumpay. /n. Okay, execute. Okay, so as what we can see here guys, okay, og naapay usa wala ma-appeal og /n dara day, sorry. Okay, so look at the different ways of how we use those optional values in the format specifier. Okay, so dire, okay, kaning sa 3.14 we have displayed it using the format specifier 5.2f. So duha ra ka decimal place ang iyang na display. Now as you can see, instead nga i-print niya mo pid siya dire kang float na ay kaigong space nga gibutang, which is based ani guys sa 5. So it makes use of 5 spaces to display 5 characters for your floating point. Okay, so likewise kung magtan-aw pud ta dire, as you can see, 3 ang gibutang, ang usa 8. Tanawa how 3 is being displayed kaning sa first two example. Okay, so makita na to guys, since nag-allocate kag more spaces for this value, okay, katong wala niya ma-occupy nga space, bakante. Okay, so mo niya ang gingon nga murag unsa na siya, right aligned by default. Okay, so naa siya extra space nga gibutang before sa value. Okay, kay occupy man na niya 8 kabuk characters, appeal naman ni siya sa ika-8. Okay, dire as you can see, same ra siya og value 8 and 5, but tanawa si 3.5 as how it is presented on the screen. Okay, kani since gagamit kag negative, so nahimo siyang sa to left aligned. So nipidpid siya sa leftmost side when printing the value ug naa diri ang extra space. Okay? Sa kinalasan. Okay? So mo na siya guys. Okay? This can really come in handy kanang magbutang ka og size kung pila ka book characters ang iyang i-allocate to display your values here. Okay? There are cases man good wherein ka na maghimo kag pinat rows and columns nga display. Now imagine kung ang imuhang ibutang dire in between sa values sa variables nga imong display, magbutang kag fixed value dira. So, ang value nga imuhang i-print kung mas mutaas, what will happen to the rest of the values? Di ba, muisdog pud sila apil. Pero kung mag-specify ka og specific nga width for each variable, regardless kung daghan na siyang value or gamay, then you can better control the displacement for each column sa values nga imuhang i-display. Okay? So again, unsa man ang gipasabot ni Sir? Oy, wa jud ko kasabot. Okay? Again, let's demonstrate. Okay? Let's say this is for column A. Okay? This is for column B. This is for column C. Okay? Nag-display ko, ana. Okay? So, let's say I print here a value. Okay? Percent %D. Okay? So, magbutang kog space. Okay? Percent %D. Okay? Para matunong lang, percent %D. Okay? So, something like that. Okay? So, let's say magbutang kog value dire. Okay? So, take note, ang ako ang gigamit pod ato. Okay? So, let's say butang kog 10, magbutang kog 100. Yeah, butang kog 1,000. Okay? So, let's do that also with other values. Like, for example, kani mas mudaghan, kani 110, and dire is 100. Okay? So, when you're trying to display your values in this manner, di ba? Nga murag naka-column, naka-tables and rows. Okay? It is possible nga for every value variable nga display nimo diri maglain-lain na siya og length, di ba? Or number of characters nga display. Okay? So, ato na nagbutang nga nag/n daan para they will be displayed from top to bottom. Okay? So, upon running the code, you can see it there. May man kay to pagkahanay dire o nagsunod man ni siya, but once you are displaying it like this, okay, unsay nabantayan? Wa na magkadimao ang iyahang display. Okay? Naghiwi-hiwi na kay ngano man specific man ang ato ang number of spaces nga gidefine dire. Okay? So that's why nang isdog tanan. Okay? Now probably for some would like to use percent %T for tab. Okay? To have a more of, let's say, consistent look. Okay? So even with tabs, di gihapon siya. Okay? Oh, dara okay ra day sa tabs kay ngano man dako man day ihang tab. Okay? So nasalba ra ang ikaduha nga column. So ang problema ani is kung padak-an nato ang value nga mula pa sa tab. Okay? So as you can see, most di mahitabo, di ba? Kung ang tab nimo usara. So ang tendency kung mula pa sana ang value, ang pikas nga column mo isdog na pod. So kung magtan-aw ta sa tong data, uy sayop. Kay ngano man, supposed to be this is in the second column, naabot siya third column. Okay? Kay equivalent man ito a single tab. Okay? So how do we solve that problem with spacing? Okay? So usually kung ganahan ka nga murag naa joy specific nga number of allocated spaces to display your variables, okay? Butangin na og value. Okay? So let's say butangan na tog 10 baron dere. So mag-allocate jud na og 10 spaces. Okay? For displaying the values. And of course, pwede sa dani mo makontrol kung left aligned ba or right aligned ba using that negative sign. Okay. So again, running the code. Okay. So as you can see, nagbutang tag 10 spaces. So 10 spaces i-allocate jud niya for each of the values. Now makita po ninyo diri guys, since right aligned, di ba? For that 10 spaces nga gi-allocate nimo, gi-display siya on the right column man sad. Pero naka-right lang, right aligned. Unlike, for example, if I print this one, okay, nga naka left aligned. Okay? So by putting a negative value. So as you can see here, di ba, mas nindot tanawon. Okay, naka-align sa right side. Or for some, might want nga naka-align sa left side. Okay? So bisang pagtaas ang ato ang value nga i-display, okay? This could really come in handy, especially when you're trying to store names. Di ba? Kaya ang names, lain-lain biya mo pangalan, nay uban pangalan mubo, nay ubang pangalan perteng taasa. Napoy pangalan na tigtulo-tulo og pangalan. Okay? So if that happens, you might want to allocate a certain number of characters for that particular rows and column. Okay? So that's how you use, guys, those additional format specifier nga naa dira sa inyuhang notes. Okay? So, additional format specifiers for you to know. Okay? So, most of the common one is kanira jud ato ang gigamit as of the moment. %F, %D, %C, %S. Okay? But you can also actually make use of these other format specifiers located here. Especially kung magamit pod mo og mga modifiers for long and for unsigned. Okay? So there's this special notation that we could use, guys, with scientific notation, %E, to display your floating point number in scientific notation. Okay? So %E lang. Okay? You can also print your value in hexadecimal with %X. Okay? So dili na lisod ang number conversion kay naa day pamaagi nga ma-display diretso nimo in hexadecimal ang imuhang integer value. Okay? So just make use of %X for that. Okay? Okay, so those are some of the things nga wala dira sa CodeCham nga mga notes information. I think na naman ni sa inyong kon guys no, na ba sa classroom wala pa. Okay? So anyway, wala pa de. I-upload lang niyo na ko aron taod-taod.
Now,
Now,
sir, itong C magkana.
oh, intro to C.
Oh,
Na ba?
na. Na.
Ah, okay. Nya nabasa ni ninyo ang about operators? Wala jud. Okay? So we already had an idea with flowcharting about arithmetic, relational, and logical operators. Okay? Ang relational operator, unsay gamit ani niya? Okay? Sa mga less than, greater than, we use that. Okay? Nya ang logical, para unsa man ang logical? Okay? For sets. Okay? True or false. Answerable by true or false. So again, logical operators, guys, katong and ug or nga operation is just similar to you using series connection of switches for and, nya parallel connection sa switches for or. Okay? So mao jud na siya si arithmetic, relational ug logical. Okay? So aside from the MDAS nga inyuhang nahibaw-an, we also have the modulo division. Okay? Unsa man na si modulo division? What is that operator, si modulo division? Okay? So, let me show you this modulo division that I am talking about. Okay? So, modulo division. is equal to percent d. Okay, so when you say 5 modulo 2, pila may answer ana. Okay, so modulo is basically an operator used to get the, unsa man na siya guys? What is 1 from that of 2? Okay, dili pa? Sige, let's have another number. Let's see if I put there 3. Okay, so 5 modulo 2 is 1. 5 modulo 3 is 2. Okay? So, unsay makuha ninyo ana nga idea? What is the modulo operator? Okay, so according to Niadas and Canonigo, those are remainders. Okay? So, we are able to get the remainder of the number using this modulo operation. Okay? So, mo na gamit ni modulo guys. Okay? We use it to get the remainder of 2 operation, and this is again applicable to integer values. Dili siya pwede og floating point. Okay? Now, take note, in terms of precedence, you simply follow the MDAS rule when talking about the precedence. So that means if you have 2 operators on the same line in the expression, okay, you evaluate first the multiplication or division, then ana pa mo sunod si subtraction o addition. Okay? So of course, ang pag-evaluate sa expression is from left to right. Okay? So again, in this example, okay, we are performing multiplication to display the area of a square given the length and the width. Okay? So with operators, with modulo operator, take note lang guys, dili pwede ang floating point value. And also, when you do integer division, okay, it will be truncated ang result. Okay, unsa man ang pasabutan ng truncated. So, when you do division with integers, okay, so since I am using an integer constant, I am performing here integer division. Okay? So, mo niya itong example before nga, makabugo kay 5 divided by 3, tubagon ta og 1. Okay? So, ang decimal part, wala ma-display. Okay? So, probably mo ingon mo, ang imong gi-display man sir decimal, so whole number ra jud. So, if i-display na to in float, okay, mas nabugo siya kay 5 divided by 3 na 0 na hinuon. Okay? So even though we have displayed it in float, but since we are performing integer division, okay, wala niya ma-interpret pag-ayo ang sakto nga tubag diri. Okay? So unsa may maayo day when you do division? When you do division, you need at least one of the operands to be a floating point number. It's either your divisor or your dividend. Either way, basta naiusana niya is a floating point number. So let's say, ang divisor, himuon na tong floating point. Unsaon to paghimog floating point nga constant? Just put 0.0. So basa sa compiler na niya, di na siya basahon as integer si 3, kung dili as a floating point number. So you are now dividing with an integer and floating point number. And we have displayed it as a float. So as you can see, sakto na ang format. Okay? So mo na to ang bantayanan guys. Okay? When you perform arithmetic operation, careful mo na ka nang magsagol ang integer o float. And take note mo sa format specifier nga gamito ninyo when displaying the number. Okay, let's say, I'm using %f to display this number nga floating point. What would happen if I say I presented it as decimal? But I am performing here correctly. How to divide? It must be composed of an integer and a floating point number. Okay? But ang pagpa-display na to, we're using %d. Okay? Morning daghan kay maglagot sa programming in C. Makabugo kay laliman kag 5 divided by 3 nahimo na may noong pila ni siya. 9,680,000. Okay? So again, the reason for this is because your number when you perform 5 divided by 3 is stored in a floating point format. And that floating point format is basically translated into like this when displayed as an integer. Okay? So, bantayanan lang jud nato guys. Okay? If you are expecting the output to be a float, then display it as a float. If you're expecting for the operation nga ang result niya is a float, make sure usa sa mga operand is also a float. Okay? So, mana siya. Things that you should take note of when working with arithmetic operators. Okay? So, again, kato-ato na itong gi-demonstrate ganina when you are working with floating point numbers. Okay? So, in terms of precedence, again, si multiplication, division, and modulo are of the same precedence as that of your addition and subtraction. So that means always maguna si multiplication, division, ug modulo. Okay? Nya, when they are on the same line like this, kinsay unahon, 5 plus 3 times 2. MDAS rule. Unahon sa nimo ang multiplication and then followed by addition or subtraction. And again, if you have multiple operators of the same precedence, you evaluate them from left to right. Okay? So again, mga examples lang, you can try this out. But of course, if ganahan ka manigurado, kung kinsa joy mauna aning A plus B divided by C, okay, you better make use of parentheses. Okay? That would help the compiler identify what you really want. Okay, there might be cases nga ano A plus B divided by C niya. Ganahan day ka nga unahon sa si A plus B. So to make sure nga mauna si A plus B kaysa B divided by C, you make use of the parenthesis sign. Okay? So, mas sayon kung may parenthesis sign. Okay? So, you'll not only be helping yourself, but you'll also be helping the compiler, okay, execute your code correctly based on your specification. Okay? Now, let's talk about the so-called type conversion. 4 minutes, damn, paspas sa oras. Unsa man sad ning type conversion? So, from the name itself, it is used for converting different types. Okay? So, for example, okay, you have there value nga increase, which is integer, and you also have there a float, okay, which is for the price. Okay? Unya, you are to compute for the new price, okay, using the formula new price plus increase. Okay? So in that case, since you have added a floating point number to your integer, expected jud nga ang imuhang result is an integer. Okay? So automatic ra na siya i-convert into a float ni C. Okay? Which is of course unlike when you perform division, guys. Okay? So sa division, dili automatic ang pag-convert into a float when you are performing integer. Okay? Pero kung naka-integer o float, then it will automatically be converted into a float. Okay? So, mao lang na inyong timan-an when automatic conversion is done and when it is not. Okay? Now, apparently, okay, there are cases wherein what if ang imuhang input like total and count nya i-divide nimo are always integer and you don't have an option to change the total nga data type. Kay dapat si total data type should only be stored as an integer. Okay? Now, you can use this so-called typecasting. Okay? This is one way of converting your data types. Unsa maning typecasting? As what I've told you before, when you are performing integer division, we need to at least have one of the operand as a float. But since gidefine naman nimo diri nga si total ug count is an integer, what you can do is you could add this so-called typecast. Unsa maning typecast? It is basically just putting the data type enclosed in a parenthesis. And what does a typecast do? It performs explicit conversion. Okay? That means it will tell the compiler nga, huy compiler, si total as of the moment is considered as a float. Okay? Para when you perform the division nga total divided by count, since total is considered by the compiler as a float, it will automatically convert the result into a floating point value that is compatible with the average variable, which is also a float. Okay? So, maoro na siya ang gamit ni typecast. Okay? So, typecast, in short, is like a temporary way for you to modify how your variable will act. Okay? So, muna siya guys. Now, let's look at some of the examples sa assignment operator. Equal sign. Again, dali ra man kayo, no? Assignment equals. What else do we need to know about the equal sign? You know about it already, but something that is new to you is probably kani. Okay? Shorthand notation for using the assignment operator. So when you encounter expressions like this, x plus equals 1, that is simply equivalent to x is equal to x plus 1. Okay? So gibuhat ni siya sa mga programmer guys to make it lesser to code the expression. Kay redundant manggod kayo, bati kay para nila tan-awon kana bang magdubli-dubli o gawas ang imuhang variable sa imong expression. Just like x is equal to x plus 1. X is equal to x plus 2. X is equal to x times 3. Okay? So to make it shorter, ilahang gigamit ning shorthand notation. Okay? So it works on all the arithmetic operators nga ato ang na-discuss earlier. Okay? So another concept, decrement ug increment. Okay? Kanilang increment ug decrement, very important sad. Okay? So imbis nga moingon pa ka og x is equal to x plus 1 for increment, or moingon kag x is equal to x minus 1 to decrement it or to minus og 1 nga value sa variable, you can just say x minus minus ug y minus minus. Okay? Okay ra ni siya ingani if single statement lang. Medyo problematic lang ni ang topic sa increment ug decrement kung i-assign nimo ang iyahang value to a variable. Okay? So, let's look at the difference lang ha between prefix ug postfix. Okay? So, as you can see here, z is 3. Okay? Now, nag-perform tag operation z minus minus. We know that z minus minus will give you 2, di ba? But take note, ang mahitabo diri guys is that before niya i-assign ang value when you perform z minus minus, ang value ni z ihatag sa niya kang x before niya minusan si z ug 1. That is why it is called postfix decrement. Okay? So take note, sa postfix, i-assign sa niya ang value to the variable before niya i-perform ang addition ba or subtraction. That's why ang x has a value of 3 and the z is 2. Now, this is what we call as a prefix increment. In a prefix increment, ang mahitabuan ni niya is that it will perform this operation first, assigning it to the variable x. So that means, ang y nimo is incremented first into 4, then assign that value of 4 to x. Okay? So that means when you say di x is equal to z minus minus, that is not equal to x equals minus minus z. Okay? So lahi ang pre-increment, lahi ang post-increment. Okay? So mao lang na guys. Okay? So again, naara na siya sa inyong notes. So this will be 12 naman. I'll just leave it for you na lang sa to read this, this part of your operators, kaning arithmetic, relational, o logical operator. Okay? So I think we'll just have to leave this part, para sa exam, kanang bitwise. We'll just include the bitwise operator after sa prelim exam. So as of now, coverage sa itong exam is up to here, logical operators. Okay? Dali ra kay na, oy. Okay? Arithmetic, naanamuan na since kinder. Relational, unsa man na siya? Grade 1. Ano na sa grade 1, di ba? Greater than, less than, not equal. Nya, logical, kanus aman ni na-introduce inyong logical? Grade 5. Okay? Ang paggamit sa and ug or. Okay? So take note lang, or mura ra ka ga-series. Ga-series. Kung ga-or, mura ka ga-parallel ug pag-evaluate. Okay? Ang and, mura ka ga-series. Meaning, dapat both conditions are true to be true, while ang sa or, bisag asa nga condition, basta naay usa true, it is true. Okay? So just like for example, diri sa inyong klase, mangutana ko og si Ronelo Jose, gwapo ba? Okay? Nya ang ingon sa kasagaran is yes. Okay? Nya nasin igon uban, no. Nya ang gigamit nato nga operator and. So unsa may ato ang kanana guys, hypothesis. Gwapo si Ronelo, yes or no? No. Kaya nga naman, naamay bisag usan ingon og no, nya nag-and operator ka. So dili tinuod. Okay? Pero kung gagamit tag or, di ba? Kung gagamit kag or, bisag majority pa ningon og no, unya si Noel ningon mag yes, gwapo jud na si Ronelo. Okay? Bisag majority pa ningon og no. Okay? And that is what or logics are. Okay? So we will be talking more about that, including with the coding after sa prelim period. Okay? So sa prelim period, ato ang konsa, ang ato ang topic would revolve more on sa introduction to C, and probably a bit of history sa C nga programming language. Okay? So wala na tong history guys. Okay? So there will be also tawag ani flow charting and pseudocodes, for your exam. Okay? And of course, a simple programming problem. Okay? So again, mo lang sa for now. Murag nilapas na ta. Okay? And I would like you guys to please kwan lang. You might want to finish the code chum during your free time kung wa mo lingaw. Try to answer it. So in a way, it's just like kwan lang jud, exercise. Okay? Supplementary exercise para sa ato ang discussion karon. So it would also involve arithmetic operations. Okay? Para mapraktisan po ninyo ang arithmetic. Okay? So before we go, can we all turn on our camera, please?